Hi and welcome to part 3 of module 4, which is entitled Registration and Regulation. Part 3 encompasses general registration and regulation of allied health professionals in Australia, in addition to the legislation and registration which is specific to orthoptists. We will also cover in this section provider payments. Why do we need registration and regulation? Well, in order to ensure that patients receive the best care by well-trained and competent health professionals, a registration and regulatory process is required and is really essential. Currently, there are 14 professions in Australia that are regulated by this national registration scheme. And recently in 2012, 4 new professions were added. And so in the future, there may actually be other professions which join the scheme. Each of the 14 professions included in this national scheme has a national board supported by the organisation known as the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Authority, or AHPRA. These boards not only regulate professionals, but can also regulate students preparing for practice. And you'll see there on the slide, the AHPRA website link is there. So your first task for this section is to read the registration and regulation section in chapter 4 of Duckett and Wilcox, which is on page 80 to 81, and answer the following questions. 1. What is the main aim of registration boards? 2. Which are the most recent professions recently added to the AHPRA scheme? A hint here is cross-check the professions listed in the Duckett textbook that when you're reading it, and those on the previous slide, which list all 14 professions. And 3, which Commonwealth Act regulates both individual health professionals and their associations, and which practices does the Act specifically prohibit? Let's now move on to consider the registration and regulation of orthoptists, because this is what's specific for you. As you would have noted in your last reading, professions not included in the National Registration Scheme are what we call self-regulated. So orthoptists, while not part of the national scheme, are self-regulated by the Australian Orthoptic Board, or AOB. Once you successfully complete your orthoptic studies, you'll be required to register with the board in order to work as an orthoptist in Australia. In essence, the AOB regulates the profession of orthoptics in order to protect the public. The board holds a register of suitably qualified orthoptists and has the capacity to investigate the professional conduct and fitness to practice of all orthoptists. The board also assesses overseas orthoptic qualifications to ensure that they are equivalent to Australian training. Let's take a look at this AOB register. Now, you'll note that the Register of Orthoptists is a publicly accessible document. Here's a screen grab of some of the registrants. It's in alphabetical order when you go on the website, and you can actually see my name on the bottom there. Now, having this publicly accessible document and being registered allows both a patient and employers to determine if the orthoptist they are seeing or that they want to employ is suitably qualified. And this is the case for all health professions. So for those professions part of the national scheme, the register is available on the AHPRA website. One thing that you should be very aware of is that it's important to note that legislation related to the prescribing of glasses and the possession and installation of topical medications, meaning drops, stipulate that an orthoptist must be registered with the AOB, the Australian Orthoptic Board. That means it's written in law that in order to prescribe glasses or use drops in a patient's eyes, you need to be registered with the AOB. As such, an orthoptist who is not registered but prescribes glasses or instills eye drops is essentially performing an illegal act. Registration with the Orthoptic Board is also required for orthoptists who are performing B-scan ultrasonography. In 2002, the Health Insurance Commission, in association with the Australasian Sonographers Accreditation Registry, introduced a program of accreditation and continuing professional education for sonographers. So through this process, ASAR, the Sonographers Registry, determined that registration with the Australian Orthoptic Board is an appropriate accreditation for an orthoptist to perform B scans. And there are not many orthoptists that perform B scans in clinic, but it may be a role that you'll be required to do. So orthoptists will need to register separately with ASAR, but they must be first registered with the AOB, as it's the AOB that first determines whether an orthoptist is appropriately qualified. And when you finish the course, you actually are qualified to perform a B scan, but it's a skill that you'll need to refine in clinic because it requires some technical ability and technical practice. There are other organisations that need you to be registered with the board, and they include things like private health funds, for example, Medibank Private and Medicare Australia. So you might be wanting your patients to claim the cost of a consultation through their private health fund, for example, but you won't be able to get a provider number unless you're registered with the AOB. So in 2007, the Private Health Insurance Act was actually amended to require practitioners to be recognised by an accredited body before a private health fund could give a rebate to patients. And in 2011, Medicare Australia introduced items as part of this Better Start initiative, which we talked about in Module 1. And they indicated that Australian Orthoptic Board registration, in addition to membership with the Professional Association Orthoptics Australia, is required for orthoptists to obtain a provider number. So to get a provider number for Better Start or private health fund, you need to be registered with the Australian Orthoptic Board as a registered practitioner and also be a member of Orthoptics Australia. So here's task 2. Given what you've learnt so far regarding registration, reflect on issues that could arise if orthoptists did not have a registration board. Think of all the reasons why you need to be registered, and if the board didn't exist, what that would stop you from doing. So while we've looked at registration, let's just do a little segue and have a look at provider payments. This is how you charge for a service or give fee for a service in the event that you're working as a private orthoptist, not in a clinic or in a public hospital setting. So there are various models of provider payment options for the healthcare industry, including fee for service, which is where the patient pays, salary, which is where you're employed by a clinic and you're given a salary, or capitation, and these are the 3 different models. In Australia, orthoptists are generally employed by hospitals, private organisations, or by ophthalmologists in private setting, and therefore you're primarily paid by a salaried or an employment contract model. So it's quite interesting to note that it's often believed that the model of provider payment, though, may affect clinical behaviour and patient outcomes, although this evidence is relatively weak. So if the patient is paying for the service that they're given, the suggestion is that the behaviour is altered. All right, so we've come to task 3. For task 3, you need to read the Models of Provider Payment section in Chapter 4 of Duckett and Wilcox, which you'll find on page 83 to 84. And also have a look at the Gosden et al. Systematic Review, and I want you to read the background and the discussion sections. Once you've done that, answer these 2 questions. 1, explain the 3 models of provider payment. I alluded to these before, but I want you to go into more detail. And 2, what did Gosden et al. In their systematic review find in relation to the main areas of interest, and specifically have a look at the discussion to answer this question. So what's next? We've covered the Australian health workforce, and we've covered registration and regulation, And now we're going to be looking at continuing professional development in the next video.